All right, we are continuing our study of the vision of the seven trumpets from the book of Revelation here on the listener's commentary. So in this recording, we're going to look at part 2 of Revelation 8:2 through 9:21. This is the first major section of the vision of the seven trumpets. And as we noted in the introduction in our last recording, the vision of the seven trumpets follows very much the form and style of the vision of the seven seals. So you have 4 trumpet blasts, the first 4 that all go together as a set. Then you get 2 more trumpet blasts that we'll look at in this recording. Then after that, you get a pause with an interlude that seems to deal with a kind of a related subject that goes along with the trumpet blast. And then finally, we get trumpet blast number 7 at the end of chapter 11. And so we are right in the middle of the 7 trumpets scene where we left off. We left off in our last recording at chapter 8, verse 12, which seems like an odd place to leave off when you have only one verse left in chapter 8. But that one verse is actually the setup for the next 2 trumpets that are about to blast. And so it made sense in the flow of the story, just not in the way our Bibles have been broken down into chapters and verses in more modern times. And so we left off right there. And in our last recording, we watched along with John as the first 4 trumpets were blown and the action that ensued from them. And that action was devastation on the natural world, devastation on the land, the sea, the rivers, the sun, moon, and stars. And we noted that this vision seems to function by saying these disasters are like temporal judgments. They allow evil to have its way, sort of along the lines of what Paul writes in Romans chapter 1, where he says, God handed them over to, right? And let evil do its worst. Well, that seems to be what's happening here is there's going to be awful things that happen on the earth, and they're like warnings. They're portents of ultimate judgment. Now what we're going to see in this recording is the next 2 angels, angels 5 and 6, are going to sound their trumpets, and these are going to be described as 2 woes. It's the first of 2 woes. The third woe will come in the next chapter. So here, angels 5 and 6, 2 woes. The first one is a locust plague, unlike any other locust plague that has ever happened, because as we'll see, these are not normal locusts. And then an invading army, but it's an invading army, again, like any other, with supernatural powers. So that's the next 2 woes. And again, these all seem to serve as both judgments and warnings, aimed at getting people to repent. So let's look at chapter 8, verse 13. As if those first 4 trumpet blasts and the devastations they brought weren't enough, well, now all of a sudden John sees an eagle heralding woe that will entail the next 3 trumpet blasts. And so John writes in verse 13 of chapter 8, Then I looked, and I heard an eagle flying in mid-heaven. So this eagle's flying high in the sky, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to those who live on the earth because of the remaining blasts of the trumpet of the 3 angels who are about to sound. And so this eagle is a herald of woe. He's like an omen or a portent of doom, right? And he's heralding that woe's about to come. There's 3 more blasts of the trumpets, and that means there's going to be 3 woes. Woe, woe, woe. And so we pick up in chapter 9, verse 1, with angel number 5 sounding his trumpet. Then the 5th angel sounded. And here's what John saw. I saw a star from heaven which had fallen to the earth, and the key to the shaft of the abyss was given to him. Now, later in Revelation chapter 20, verse 1, it's an angel that John sees who has a key to the abyss. So maybe this, what looked like a star from heaven, maybe it's actually an angel or represents an angel that John sees. Not totally sure, but we just know that later in Revelation, it's an angel who has this key. And so this angel or this star that's fallen to earth has been given the key to the shaft of the abyss. And verse 2, he opened the shaft of the abyss. He used his key, unlocked it, and opens the shaft of the abyss, and smoke then billows out of the shaft like the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke from the shaft. And so as this smoke comes out, things get dark and dim because of the smoke now covering the sky. And when we think about the abyss was really just a standard feature of the thought world of John's day, of the Greeks, the Romans, as well as the Jews. It's not something we think about all the time, but in their world, they thought about the abyss, and it was considered the underworld, where evil spirits were imprisoned. If the abyss were opened, then who knows what awful things might emerge. That's their thought world. Think about how, like in certain genres of movies, the end of the world type thrillers or some certain kinds of sci-fi dramas, how as the camera pans to a giant crack forming in the ground or into a huge underground cavern that's opening up before the main characters or whatever else, we expect something awful to happen. Well, that's the same idea of how people in John's day thought about the abyss, and how in apocalyptic literature the abyss functioned. And so as John describes what he sees, this falling star with a key that unlocks the abyss and opens up the abyss, all the original readers are expecting something awful to unfold. There's this expectation of dread, right? That's the idea. As John's witnessing this, he's like, oh no, what's about to happen? Interestingly, there was actually a local connection with something like the shaft into the underworld, into the abyss, in the realm of Ephesus and Asia Minor, where John is writing to. There was this thing called the plutonium. It was famous in the area. It was actually near the city of Hierapolis, which was a neighbor to Laodicea. Laodicea is one of the 7 cities that John is writing to, and the plutonium was described as the black abyss of Pluto. In fact, to this day, it spews out poisonous gas, this opening into the earth, and it's actually marked with a sign if you go to the area today. So, as John is writing this down, you need to think like you're watching some sort of sci-fi apocalyptic type movie. There's this shining being like a star who comes down out of the heavens and opens up this abyss. Smoke billows out. That's what John sees. And verse 3 continues and says, "Then out of the smoke came locusts upon the earth, and power was given to them, as the scorpions of the earth have power." And so you get these locust-like creatures that now come buzzing and flying out of the abyss, right out of the smoke as you picture the scene. And these locusts have a unique power. They have scorpion-like power. We're going to find out more what that means very shortly. So let's keep reading. It says, "They were told not to hurt the grass of the earth, nor any green thing, nor any tree. This is unusual. Locust plagues were well known in the ancient world. They were known for devastating agricultural crops for centuries. You can read about a famous locust plague in the Bible in Joel chapter 1 and 2, where Joel himself sees a vision of a locust plague as God's judgment on the world. But these locusts are specifically told, no, your job is not to gnaw away all the wheat and all the corn or any of the plants or any trees or anything else. You're not to destroy any of the vegetation. Here's what you're only supposed to do, but only to attack the people who don't have the seal of God on their foreheads." In other words, these are locusts, kind of, but they're not normal locusts. They've come up out of the abyss, so they're like abyss locusts. And they have scorpion-like poison within them, scorpion-like power or poison in them. And they're commanded, don't attack the crops, only attack people. And not just any people. Notice it says, only attack the people who don't have the seal of God on their foreheads. In other words, you got to think back to chapter 7, where God's people are marked out with God's seal as belonging to him and thus protected by him. They can stand before God's judgments and God's wrath. Why? Because they're his people. And so they are protected and safe. And so these abyss locusts are commanded to attack those people who don't belong to God. But their attack on people itself is also limited. Notice verse 5. They were not permitted to kill anyone. So they can attack people, but they can't kill them. They're only allowed to torment people for 5 months, and their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it stings a person. So they attack people. They have scorpion power. They have like a scorpion tail or a scorpion stinger on the back, and they can attack people and make them miserable for 5 months. In fact, the misery was so agonizing that people wanted to die. That's how bad their sting was. So look at verse 6. And in those days, people will seek death and won't find it. They will long to die, and death will flee from them. So they're so miserable from this abyss locust plague that attacks people that they're dying to die, but they can't because death flees from them. Then John goes on to actually describe this plague of abyss locusts to help us kind of picture the scene. He's kind of given us a quick overview. Now he's going to describe it in more detail to help us visualize what he saw. And it's like a crazy mashup of images that portray this locust plague like an attacking army from the underworld. So look what he writes in verse 7. The appearance of the locust was like horses prepared for battle, and on their heads appeared crowns of gold, and their faces were like human faces. And so just think about this as you try to picture it. It's just a weird mashup, right? You got like horses in armor prepared for battle, and then you got human faces on these weird abyss locusts, but they've got crowns on them, so they've got authority and power. And then they had hair like the hair of women, so they got long flowing hair, but their teeth are like the teeth of lions, so they got sharp gnawing teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sounds of their wings was like the sound of chariots, of many horses rushing to battle. And so you get the thundering and the noise of horses running to battle and chariots clanking and clashing as they come along. This is the sound. So as John describes, here's what I saw and here's what I heard. And it was like this crazy, weird, almost like invading army type sound, but it's these weird abyss locusts that's coming through. And then he goes on and says they have tails like scorpions, and they sting, and in their tails is their power to hurt people for 5 months. Once again, alluding to the limits put on their power. They get to hurt people, they can't kill them, and they can only hurt them for 5 months. And then he says, and they have as king over them the angel of the abyss, the ruler of the abyss, and his name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek he has the name Apollyon. Both these names in Hebrew and in Greek mean destroyer. So the leader of this weird horde of abyss locusts is Apollyon, destroyer, the one who wants to destroy people and destroy God's good world. And that's the first woe, right? This eagle pronounced, woe, woe, woe. Be wary of what's coming next because of the 3 angels about to sound. Well, the first one has sounded, and that's the first woe. So verse 12 says, the first woe has passed. Behold, 2 woes are still coming after these things. And so we get in verse 13, then the 6th angel sounded his trumpet, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar, which is before God. Remember, there's an altar in the throne room where John is witnessing this massive spectacle. And that altar, like all ancient altars, had horns on it. Each of the corners had like a little cast horn on the altar. So I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the 6th angel who had the trumpet, release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. The river Euphrates lies kind of to the north and the east of Syria and Galilee and Israel, all of that, right? Like Judea and all that. It's kind of to the north and the east of that. And in some regards, it was sort of like the unofficial boundary of the Roman Empire as it had expanded to the east. And on the other side of the Euphrates were the Parthian hordes. And the Roman army and the Roman leaders kind of dreaded the Parthian hordes. They were like their great adversary. They were the unpredictable enemy on the other side of the Euphrates. In recent memory, the Parthians had actually defeated the Roman military as they tried to advance to the east and as the Parthians were trying to invade more towards the west. And so mentioning the river Euphrates to the original audience would pick up sort of this, would play off this dread of, oh, those dreaded Parthians who are like mortal enemies who live over on the other side of that boundary. And so that's what we're playing off of here. And so release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels, verse 15, who had been prepared for this hour and day and month and year were released. This was their big moment. They had been trained, prepared, and waiting and ready for this moment. And now they've been released so that they would kill a third of mankind. Remember, this is woe number 2. It's the 6th trumpet. And the first 4 trumpets dealt with a third of the natural world, the land and the sea and the freshwater supplies and even the sun, moon, and stars. But now we've moved to not just the natural world, but to people themselves, so that they would kill a third of mankind. And the number of the armies of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number of them. In other words, he heard it, and it's such an exorbitant amount, such an unreasonable amount that John is shocked, and he basically says, you may not believe it, but I heard the number of them, 200 million. And this is how I saw in my vision the horses and those who sat on them. And so he's going to say, this is what they looked like. The riders had breastplates the color of fire, of hyacinth, of brimstone. And the heads of the horses are like the heads of lions. So now you got to picture again, unusual creatures with not normal horse heads, but lion heads on horses' bodies. And out of their mouths came fire and smoke and brimstone. Now, again, this is apocalyptic literature. And this is like a crazy mashup of images. Imagine, if you will, watching, say, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and there's crazy creatures who attack members of the fellowship, right? And they got like weird wolf-like bodies, but they're not normal. Well, that's sort of what's going on here. In apocalyptic literature, you can do these things and you can mash up this stuff. And so John is watching this drama unfold and is describing as best as he can what he sees. And so he sees this army with these weird horses, but these horses have lion-like heads, and they have this multicolored breastplate upon them. And the breastplate is like a fire, that is red, hyacinth, which is blue, and brimstone, which is sort of a yellowish color. And so that's the breastplates on the riders on these weird horses. And they're coming riding out, and it's not a small little army. It's more than you can even imagine. 200 million of them. And verse 18 says, and a third of mankind was killed by these 3 plagues. And the 3 plagues are the things that come out of their mouths by the fire, the smoke, and the brimstone, which came out of their mouths. And so that's what they used to actually kill people. It's just as the horses breathed on people, those became plagues that killed a third of mankind. For the power of the horses is in their mouths, but it's also in their tails. For their tails are like serpents and have heads. So now they've got like lion heads on these horses, but they got snake's tails, and their tails have heads on them, and then they can bite and poison people and kill them. So these are some wild, terrifying, fantasy-like horses that John sees. And as wild and as crazy as this scene is, remember, it's unleashed as God's angels blow their trumpets. So God ultimately is the one that oversees these woes. And he's doing so, as we saw in our last recording, in response to the prayers of his people who are crying out for God to help, who are crying out for God to vindicate them, who are crying out for God to deliver. And God, in response, sends these woes and these plagues on people. And for the original audience, I imagine this scene is a moment to applaud and cheer, because this The scene shows that their persecutors and their oppressors are going to be held accountable and will be brought to account, right? The original audience is already suffering a good deal because of their faith and faithfulness to Jesus. And here, God responds and God acts in this crazy fantasy-like curse upon mankind. And the original audience, I think, is like encouraged by that, strengthened by that. Yes, God hears our prayers, and yes, someday he's going to bring judgment on the earth. But while these plagues portray God's judgment on mankind, there are also warnings. Warnings that say judgment is coming, and judgment is like this. So only a third of people, which is a significant amount, but it's still not all, only a third of people were killed by this last woe in the vision John sees. So what about the rest? We'll look at verse 20. The rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands, so as not to worship demons and their idols of gold, silver, brass, stone, and wood, which can neither see nor hear nor walk. And they didn't repent of their murders, nor of their witchcraft, nor of their sexual immorality, nor of their thefts. And this reminds us that these partial and temporal judgments also serve as warnings and as really calls to repent. That's one of the reasons why they are trumpets, right? They're warning blasts saying, judgment's coming and you need to repent. That's how they should prepare for judgment. But guess what? They don't. They don't repent. And what does that remind us? Well, that reminds us of the deeply sinful nature of mankind and the deep rebellion of mankind against God. Even with warnings of judgment, they don't repent. And the vision that John sees here is a repacking of material from God's judgment on Egypt, the plagues on them, as well as material from Joel and some of the other prophets about God's judgment on Israel. And this helps us see the purpose of such imagery. The imagery is to paint this graphic picture that heralds God's judgment on the unfaithful and on those who oppress the faithful. God is on his throne, and he can and does use the things in this world, so-called natural disaster, invasions, war. He uses those things to inflict his judgment on nations and on peoples, and he does so as a way to call them to repent. And in the vision, all of this is God's response to the prayers of his people. And that should remind us as God's people today to pray for vindication, to pray for God to hold empires and oppressors accountable, for God to act in ways that call people to repent, to try to get people's attention. I think of the line in C.S. Lewis's book, The Problem of Pain, where he says that God whispers to us in our comforts and our pleasures, but he shouts to us in our pain. And this vision is one of those moments where God is using judgment, temporal judgments, temporal pain, to call the people to repent, to warn of judgment. And unfortunately, they don't listen and they don't repent. And this vision also warns Christians in the original audience and today, Christians flirting with accommodation and compromise. Don't compromise. Don't be part of the world. God will judge and God will hold them accountable. It's coming fully and completely someday. But in the meantime, there are temporal judgments that serve to hold people accountable and to call the rest of mankind to repent. And we can only hope that in some way people will someday repent. All right, thanks for tuning into this session of the Listener's Commentary on the New Testament. The Listener's Commentary is a listener-supported, crowd-funded Bible teaching ministry that's only possible by the generosity of folks just like you. So thanks a ton for your support. And if you want to join a team of supporters, you can go to listenerscommentary.com. You can sign up for the Study Hub. And if you're able to give an amount there, that's one way to support this ministry. Or you can click the Give button, and that'll redirect you to my page at World Family Mission, a registered nonprofit, where you can set up a one-time donation, or you can click a little box that says Make This Monthly, and that will enable you to give monthly to this ministry. Thanks a ton for your support.